Okay, you guys, I'm actually going to be breaking chapter 3 up into two parts because it's a bit of a longer chapter. So I'm going to read Elijah of Buxton by Christopher Paul Curtis. Um, and I'm starting with chapter 3, part 1 for this video. This is Fish Head Chunking. It was Friday evening, and I finished my lessons at school and started walking to the stable to do my chores. I was gonna have to work faster than I do most days because a bunch of people were counting on me to bring them some fish. Mr. Segee was next to the barn raking through his truck patch. "Good afternoon, Mr. Segee." "Why, lo there, Elijah. I can always tell when you're on your way. Old Flapjack get worked up about 15 minutes before you gets here." "I don't know why people say horses and mules are dull, Mr. Segee, especially old Flapjack." Oh, sorry, that's him talking. "I don't know why people say horses and mules are dull, Mr. Segee, especially old Flapjack. He's got to be the smartest mule ever." Mr. Segee snorted like he thought I'd lost my mind. "Well, it's good you here, boy. Now go on in. Let them animals waiting on you." I separate my chores at the stable into two parts, the working part and the enjoying part. The working part is doing the things you wouldn't do unless you were forced to. I get them done first. The things like cleaning the stalls and shoveling manure and taking it to the fertilizer pile and feeding and watering the animals. This takes a considerable good amount of time. The second part of my chores, the enjoying part, is divided into brushing the animals, tending to their hooves, and my favorite part, helping make them comforted by keeping the horseflies off of them. It weren't just for their good that this was my favoriteest job. I was getting something out of it too. I was getting flies to use for bait. But I figured out that this chore fit right in with the Buxton settlement creed, one helping one to uplift all. It's the way all of us in the settlement look out for one another. Look out for one another. We don't expect nothing in return, but if we see someone that needs a hand, we rush to give it. Good things always come from that. I got my fly swath, pulling a milking stool next to old Flapjack and waited. It weren't long afore a good-sized fly lit just above his rear hoof. Crack! Blang it all! I ain't the type to make the mistake of cursing out loud like that, but sometimes swear words'll jump out of you afore you have a chance to remember they ain't proper. Those words came out of me from being frustrated. I weren't swatting flies just for the sake of killing them. And sometimes I got a little too strong. I'd been swatting horseflies for so many years that I could tell by the sound the fly swat made once it hit if I was going to be able to use the fly for fishing or not. And crack was the sound that most times weren't too good. I looked under old Flapjack and I was right. The fly was in the dust and nothing was moving on him except for the green guts that were leaking out of his busted up back end. I picked him up by his wings and blew him off, and dropped him in the dead pouch. Two more horseflies landed on old Flapjack's flank, and it was a chance to make up for the mistake I just made. I mean the hitting the fly too hard mistake, not the swearing mistake. Mr. Travis tells us swearing's the kind of mistake that once you do it, there ain't no way to make up for it. I studied the two horseflies that had landed on old Flap real careful. When a couple of them land close together like this, it ain't long before they take notice of one another and quit seeing anything else. It's kind of like they put a spell or conjure on each other, and truth told, once they do, it's easier to hit two at once than it is to hit one. The two flies saw each other at near the same time and froze to their moving, trying to see which was the toughest. This weren't the right thing to do, cause weren't neither one of them tough as my fly swath, and it was about to do a whole lot more bad to 'em than any other horsefly ever could. Padop! Now that was a good sound. That meant I hadn't hit 'em hard enough to break no fly bones or nothing, but I had hit them so's they were gonna get a little dumbstruck. Most likely they wouldn't be doing no more flying, but they should still be alive and kicking. I looked under the mule again, and there they were, wings still a-buzzing, and each of one of them spinning in circles on the ground, raising up two little clouds of dust. I quick snatched them up and put them in the live pouch. with the other ones that I was going to use for big fish bait. The preacher will tell anyone that listens that the biggest, most ornery horseflies in the world live right here in Buxton. Mostly he tells the new free slaves that come here because he don't love nothing more than letting them know how amazing him and the rest of us folks in Buxton are. But truth told, it's mostly how amazing he is. One time, 7 free slaves came into the settlement all at once, and the preacher took it on himself to welcome them. This was before the elders found out what he was doing and quick made sure it didn't happen again. He told those 7 new free people about what difficult days were ahead. "Winters!" he shouted at them. "In your worst nightmares you can't imagine how bad the winters are up here. Got so cold during the winter of '53 that flames on candles froze solid. Even the sun was frozen in place halfway across the sky. It didn't thaw out and commence moving again until the summer of '54. 7 months of nothing but sunlight, which explains why the horseflies up here are unnaturally large and ornery, since they had 2 growing seasons instead of the usual 1. The preacher liked waving his arms round whilst he was talking, and he was really going at it to try to impress these new folks. "I was out in the field plowing with my mule that summer," he said, which should have let on that this was going to be a powerful stretching of the truth, "'cause don't no one round here ever recall seeing the reins of a mule or any other kind of working tool in preacher's hands. When suddenly these 2 horseflies start buzzing overhead, and one asks the other, 'What do you think? Should we eat that mule here or drag him into the woods and polish him off?' The second fly says, 'Let's eat him here. If we take him to the woods, the full-grown horseflies will snatch him away from us.' I ain't seen no signs of horseflies that big round here, but it could be true. The preacher's a mighty smart man. I only know that the fish at Old Flapjack's Lake sure do think these horseflies are the best eating they've ever done." Once I got through the flies and checked round the stable to make sure I'd done everything, I went back out to Mr. Segee. "Everything's done, Mr. Segee. 'Lijah, when you says everything's done, ain't no need for me to check. Ain't none of the other children look after the stable the way you do. When's your next day?' 'Monday, sir.' 'Well then, see you on Monday.' 'Yes, sir.' 'Sir, is it gonna be all right if I take old Flapjack out for a spell?' It was the same thing every Friday, and he never said no. But Ma and Pa always say it's polite and proper to ask and not to make no assumptions. Why, let me think a second, boy. Is it all right for you to take the old mule out?" Mr. Segee leaned on the rake he was using and kind of stared up into the clouds. Then he said, "I think they done called off the horse racing for this evening, Elijah. Seems like all them horses, even Jingle Boy and Conqueror, done pulled out once they got wind of old Flapjack was running again. Figure they ain't got no chance at whooping that mule. So it don't seem like you taking him is going to be a problem." Mr. Segee came up from Mississippi only a year ago, and Ma says we got to give him some allowance for the kind of things he thinks is funny. So I gave him a little laugh every time he makes one of them bad jokes. I could tell Flapjack was raring to go, but unless you know what to look for, you might not see it. His raring to go looks a powerful lot like his not wanting to move look. So as I let him out of the stable, he started off on the road that runs through the main part of the settlement. I knowed there weren't no rush to catch him. I knowed exactly where he was going. Once he got out of the stable, he'd head straight down the road afore he cut off into the woods, heading for the lake he first took me to about a year ago. I had plenty of time to put away the tools and the wheelbarrow and gather up my fly pouches and my chunking stones and my net basket and the strings that I use for holding the fish I catch. When I got done, I cut through some fields and caught old Flapjack just as he passed Miss Carolina's house. I jumped up on his back and let him carry me to our secret lake. Most folks say it's wrong, but if I had my druthers, I'd ride a mule over a horse. Ride a mule over a horse any day. Horses do too much shaking of your insides when you ride them, and they're a long way up if you lose your grip and fall. Mules don't jar nothing when they walk. They like slow and easy travel. I'm just checking, you guys. I feel like, oh, okay. They have a way of rocking you gentle like a baby in a crib. If you don't fall asleep first, you get a chance to think about things when you ride a mule. With a horse, you don't get to think about nothing but hoping you don't fall off and get cold-cocked by their hooves. If you fall off a mule, you're already close to the ground and got plenty of time to roll out of the way of their feet. Slow as old Flapjack is, if you fell off him, you'd have time enough to take a nap before you had to worry about him stomping on you. Flapjack left the road and turned off into the woods, just after we crossed out of the settlement and passed the preacher's house. It didn't look like the preacher was home. Now that I've stopped and called on him, it's just that lately, since he's seen Jesus has been giving me gifts, he lets me come with him and watch when he practices shooting off his mystery pistol. It just was last month that preacher snuck up on me whilst I was out at the Atlas clearing chunking rocks. He came out from behind a tree and said, "Did I see what I think I saw, or are my eyes deceiving me?" He sounded so surprised that I looked round at the clearing, expecting something peculiar to be going on. "What did you see, sir?" The preacher said, "I saw you, Elijah. I saw what you were doing, and I'm afraid it has the look of conjuring to it." I couldn't understand what he was talking about. I was sure I hadn't done nothing that no one could claim was conjuring. I said, "No, sir, I wouldn't ever do something like conjuring. I wear doing nothing but chunking stones." He said, "That's what I'm talking about. I've never seen a soul throw a rock. That's what I'm talking about. I've never seen a soul throw a rock like you do, and Elijah, I have to tell you, I'm quite concerned. I have to do some serious pondering on this to see if it's the work of the devil. You do know that being left-handed is one of the sure signs of being in Satan's clutches, don't you? You guys, that's a very old superstition. If you're left-handed, it's not the work of the devil. I am left-handed, okay? It's looking like I'm saying my right hand, but it's opposite, okay? I'm left-handed. That's very old-fashioned. Keep in mind we're in the 1800s. I said, "No, sir." He said, "Keep that in mind. Come with me. I'm going a little deeper in the woods to practice shoot, and bring some of those rocks you have there." I told Ma I weren't go no further than the Atlas clearing, but since I was going to be with the preacher, I figured it'd be all right if I followed him. Besides, if it meant that I'd get to see him shooting off his mystery pistol, weren't nothing gonna stop me. I'd spent lots of time sneaking through the woods, mostly at night, but I didn't recognize the way preacher started leading me. All I knowed for sure was that it was where me and Cooter had been warned not to go. Off toward the way where some of the white people that didn't like us lived. Pa told us it was way up full with black bears and bats, and worst of all, millions of rattling snakes. I sure was glad that preacher had his gun, 'cause truth told, whilst I knowed I wouldn't have no trouble chunking a rattling snake with my rocks, I can't say for sure I could stop one of those black bears. Me and the preacher must have walked for half an hour, but I couldn't be sure. When you don't know where you're heading, time don't seem to run by like it normal do. But with every step we took, I was getting more and more disappointed in this new area. From the way Pa had warned me, I'd always pictured these woods as having so many bears hanging out of the trees that the sunlight would have blocked off from hitting the ground. I'd always pictured that there'd be so many rattling snakes hissing and shaking in these parts that you'd near go about deaf from the racket they made. But we'd been walking a good long time, and there was still plenty of sunlight, and I hadn't heard a rattle the first. We hadn't even seen one bat. Finally, we got to another clearing, and the preacher said, "I'm going to give you some tests, Elijah, and I'm hoping that they prove you haven't been conjuring, because if you have, it's my responsibility to let the word be spread." I weren't sure what he meant by that, but I knowed it weren't good. He said, "I'm going to set these pieces of wood up at about 20 paces, and I want to see how many of them you can hit." I started thinking this over. Hitting something from 20 paces, it weren't nothing. but I wondered if I should miss one or two of them on purpose so's the preacher wouldn't see no signs of conjuring. But this was the preacher, and he was so smart it'd be hard to fool him. He was always telling me he forgot more than I ever knowed, which don't make a lot of sense, but it was probably going to be best on me if I chunked for real and didn't hold back. The preacher walked off 20 steps and set up 5 hunks of wood about 3 feet apart from one another. He came back and told me, "Let's see how many of them you can hit before I count to 5. I put 2 stones in my right hand and 3 in my left." The preacher raised an eyebrow like he hadn't ever seen anything like this and said, "Set, go, 1. I throwed left, right, left, right, left. The preacher only counted to 3 before I had all 5 of those wood hunks flying through the air. He looked at me in a way that told me he thought for sure I was a conjuring. He didn't say nothing, but he walked back the 20 paces, and this time he set up 10 pieces of wood. He came back and drawed his mystery pistol out of its fancy holster and said, "When I say go, you hit the 5 on the right, and I'm going to hit the 5 on the left. I got my rocks ready. Go!" The loud way the pistol exploded right next to me throwed me off, and I missed the first piece of wood, but quick knocked out the others. By the time I'd finished, the preacher had only shot 3 of the wood hunks and was sighting in on number 4. He stopped and looked at me like he's puzzling, then said, "I'm going to have to do some more contemplating over this. On the one hand, this might be an act of conjuration." He put his right hand out like he's expecting something to drop in it. On the other hand, his left hand came up. "We might be witnessing a gift from Jesus himself." He brung his hands together like he was fixing to pray. "I'm not ready to come right out and say whether this is conjuring or the Lord, but whatever it is, it sure is unnatural for a boy to be tossing stones like that." A few days later, the preacher let me and the other folks know it had been showed to him that my rock chunking was gave to me as a gift from Jesus. He told folks my arm and my eye were so true that I could knock the spots off a ladybug without harming her at all, if I took the notion to do so. He said what happened to a stone after I chunked it was like a ball shot out one of them old muzzle-loaded rifles. It weren't the quickest thing getting to where it was aimed, but once it got there, all sorts of "Who Struck John" busted loose. I believed the preacher when he told me that what I got was a gift from the Lord, but that didn't mean I didn't have no doubts about it from time to time. I'd been meaning to ask our Sabbath school teacher, Mr. Travis, if it was blaspheming to say this, but seemed to me if this rock chunking really was a gift from Jesus, it would be the sort of thing that would be there forever, and for me it weren't at all. This was a gift that needed lots of practicing, else it went away. Ma and Pa weren't too impressed by the preacher saying these things neither. When I told Pa what got showed to the preacher, he asked, "How come Jesus only choose certain folk to talk direct to? And how come they's always the ones that ain't got nothing at all in common with the Bible?" And that's it for part 1. Stay tuned for chapter 3, part 2.